My name is Mina Chun, and I'm the Associate Dean of First Year Experience at MICA. Thank you everyone for being here, and for those tuning in live Zoom, welcome. We are here at UMBC's the Center for Art, Design, and Visual Culture at the site of this extraordinary solo exhibition, Sewing Circles, by MICA faculty and interdisciplinary fiber artist, Annet Couwenberg. On display until December 11th, the show presents an overview of 10 years of cultural research, digital experimentation, and finished artifacts by Annet Couwenberg, who uses lace as a primary material. Through her creations, the artist asks how traditional textile construction can be modified and transformed by adapting it to digital fabrication processes. We are excited to have the audience of many MICA's first-year students here in real life and also viewing online, and for themselves to directly see and witness first-handedly the excellence and professionalism of an artist, teacher, creative practice, and also to be exposed to the innovative fabrication processes that is possible in art and design. We're also very lucky to have another professor, Ryan Hoover, interim chair of the Interdisciplinary Sculpture Department, here today to converse with Annet with her artist talk. Annet is titling this gathering as "Whose Shoulders I Am Standing On? Traditional Craft and How It Can Inform Emerging Technologies" with Ryan Hoover, who she accounts as her esteemed colleague, visionary, and teaching collaborator. Before I pass on the mic, I'd also like to thank Sims Gardner, the director of the center, for his staff for having us today. MICA's amazing Office of Events, John Lippitz and his team for making Zoom live and everything else possible. Brian Hagerman, Program Coordinator, FYE, Elizabeth English Curricular Coordinator of Form and Space for their organization to make this trip possible. Our MICA shuttle bus drivers, Mr. Miller and Mr. Mike, for bringing our students here safely. And the faculty members who came here today with their students, Jose Galarza, Tony Lugo, and Michelle LaPerriere, chair of our first year program. Thank you for all being here. Michael Weiss, Dean of Fine Arts, is here as well, so thank you for joining us. And so without further delay, here's my wonderful colleague and friend, MICA's treasure, Annet Couwenberg, and with Ryan Hoover, also MICA's extraordinaire.
I just want to say thank you for everyone coming and for everyone organizing this event. And I'm just so honored to be here with my dear friend and colleague and in many ways mentor and sort of inspiration, Annet. It's a real honor to do this together. So
thank you so much. Thank you for being here. I already got some amazing questions. What I wanted to say is, you want to sit on the floor? Yes. You want to just make yourself comfortable. All right. It feels a lot better. Okay. So welcome. As I said already to some of you, I know this is an extremely stressful, busy time of your semester. So I am honored and grateful you're here. As I said before, I need a crit, so I want to hear more right later. Whose shoulders am I standing on? I think that's really important for me. I'm thinking about that a lot lately, but I think it is a thread in my work. I say thread on purpose. It's not that I don't think about that, because thread and textiles is really the thread in my work. So whose shoulders am I standing on? And I want you to think about it yourself and write it down later in your notebook. I think it's really important to think about who are your forebearers? Who are the ones that got you here? Who are the ones that gave you the power to do what you need to do in this world? So to give the example of myself, It's the women in my family. On Tuesday, I'm from a country where everything is pretty systematically organized. I'm from the Netherlands in Europe. We not sow on Monday, we sow on Tuesday. Just keep that in mind. So on Tuesday morning, the women of my family come together. They sit around the table and they sew and they mend. It has changed a little bit, but not when I was a kid. My two aunts, my mother, my grandmother. What I later realized when I was in art school and I had this luxurious privilege of thinking about where I came from, I realized that their clothes were actually showing me aspects of themselves that I never had thought about. I wasn't that interested in the dresses. I wasn't that interested in the mending, vaguely in the back of my mind. I was interested in what they were talking about or what they were not talking about, or how they were making and how they were in the social context of the sewing circle. You can see where it's coming from. How they were reacting to each other. How were they treating each other? What were they talking about? The sewing circle becomes the third person in the room. Art can be the third person in the room to talk about difficult issues. It's that moment that you sit around, as you see in the video with the Muslim women, back in my hometown, in my own neighborhood. You can talk about issues freely. That's where I'm from. I don't want to go through all the steps, but I want you to realize that I now know where I'm going to. If you look and you turn around and you look at those, what I call commemorative textiles, the pink ones, that's where we're heading to. I am heading to. That's my daughter and her partner. And just before COVID, we had a session together. We had a sewing circle. What happened at sewing circle is a friend of mine has been asking me to put these pieces back. You know, when a teacher says something and you're like, what? This friend of mine said, you need to put the pieces back on the body. And I'm like, no. Love the sculptures. So I told her I would do it. This was for a Be More Art magazine article. But you have to promise me one thing. I'm doing it with my family. I'm doing it in my living room. And I do it with my husband who takes the photographs. And if they're terrible, you will never see them. And nobody will see them. So what happened just before COVID? They came down from Brooklyn. We were hanging out together, eating, talking, maybe a little wine. And we were talking about what's going on in the world. And we were talking about where these pieces belonged. And I would look at them and I'm like, I don't know. Yeah, the Dutch color goes around. But it was the best time of having concentrated time with people you love, talking about issues that are going on in the world and with them. Keep that in mind. That's where I'm heading. And I want you to think about the sewing circle that way. The rest is here. And sometimes it's okay to just say beauty is beauty. It's okay. But for me, all these pieces represent working with other people. There is not a piece in this room that Ryan McGibbon, Ryan Hoover, the fiber department, everybody in the fiber department had influence on. Every single one. I could only mention my honor roll, but that's a lot of people. Students who helped me, we can't do this alone. It is about collective effort and learning from each other. All right, keep that in mind. And then I have done my job. All right, so we wanted to talk, Ryan and I, a little bit about how do you move from that moment that the thread, we were just talking about that the needle goes through the surface and start building a surface. Thread is three-dimensional. The moment that the needle goes through, the needle is the interface. The needle is a tool. Laser cut is a tool. A 3D printer is a tool. How can we look at craft, at textiles, and then see how emerging technologies can inform that, or the other way around? So let's talk a little bit about that. Ryan and I teach a course, it's called Unravel the Code, and that's what we do. We look at that. So you want to talk a little bit about that?
Sure. Yeah, I really appreciate hearing you talk about like you growing up and sort of what that environment was that sort of helped set your trajectory. I think so many of these things like we don't realize until later in life, like oh right, that's why I'm this way, right? And hearing you talk, I was thinking like you growing up, you know, I grew up very much in my dad's wood shop. And I think there's so many things from that are just ingrained in me. And I think I'm using that term somewhat intentionally, like you use thread. And it was time with him, but time also like with the hands, with material, and also with machines a lot. A lot of the time is spent just sort of working on a machine and like maybe or building it or modifying a machine to get it to do what you want it to do. So there is that, yeah, and then this sort of intimate relationship happens like even between you and the machine as well. So, but still always grounded in this kind of practice of craft. And I think that's something I think that's a kind of touchstone that we share in many ways. And that then informs how we approach these kind of new emerging technologies of making in a lot of ways. And that's what Unravel the Code is. It's a course that we've taught together for like 8 years now. Where we're really looking at traditional crafts as a means of understanding these emerging technologies of making. There's so many things about like digital fabrication, laser cutters, and CNC mills, 3D printers that all sort of originate from this kind of what I think we often think of as a virtual space of 3D modeling software, right? But I think there's this kind of interesting shift that's happened, I think, in our lifetime, where this kind of computational space is no longer a sort of virtual imitation of the physical world, right? In many cases, this kind of like 3D model of perhaps this building existed before the building did itself. So this relationship is sort of inverted in a lot of ways in terms of this kind of relationship to the digital and physical. But I think being able to sort of constantly go back and forth between these things is what's particularly exciting. And I think having this kind of perspective that is grounded in the craft helps us to sort of understand these kind of virtual and digital practices as well. And that's a lot of what we're sort of interrogating in the class and a lot of what we see in this exhibition, which to me is just so exciting to see this all brought to life, both in terms of kind of processes, materials, but also in particular the body both in relationship to materials and making, but also just in relationship to culture and each other and just the humanity of things and that sense of intimacy. It really, I feel like pervades so much of this work in the show, and I really want to I hope we can kind of dive into that on some of these individual pieces.
Thank you. I wanted to continue on that thought and how I worked with the digital and the analog in a sense of, as a fiber artist who always has worked with her hand, who's a non-computer native, really needed to think about it as how does the computer see? How does an algorithm, how is it built in the sense of patterning, accumulation, the way that I think about weaving. How does the computer translate my information, or can it emphasize or observe through the computer? So I think about the computer a lot as a means of a tool, as much as the sewing machine, as much as the needle, to start taking it apart and understanding it. So I am extremely interested in taking information, importing it into the algorithm, a system that already exists. That system is built by humans. That system gives us a feeling and reflects where we are in the world. It has the same values as we have. Problematic values, good meaning, bad meaning. Because it was made by humans. So how can I then put that information into the computer, and how does the algorithm shift that meaning? Is there a shift, and what is the shift? Can I influence the shift? Is it corrupted? Does the algorithm corrupt my information? And that is really what I'm looking for. So I make all these things to get a better understanding of humanity, of self. And textiles is all about humanity. And what Ryan said before, the idea of that, the body is really part of that. When I hang over the laser cutter, I hang over the laser cutter because I see the tool weaving. I'm not kidding. Observing that and understanding that it builds one by one. And the funny thing is some algorithms jump. And I'm like, where the hell are you jumping? So I want to know that. So that needs to be an extension of me, but it needs to be part of my body. And I need to feel it. Embodied knowledge for me is the most important. When I go back to the Netherlands and I step on my bike, and I haven't done that because I don't do that in Baltimore, my body remembers. That's embodied knowledge. It's really important knowledge. When I say knowledge, I think about a box, just a square. And then I think about a box that has expanded, and that's experience. And we need both. So think about that you have your closet full with sweaters, right? Think about the meaning of the sweater in the closet. How it changes at the moment you put it on your body. I see a lot of, it changes. What does change? Where do I go in the world, in the social context? Social understanding where this is going. Am I going out? Or am I hanging with friends? At the moment we take cloth and we wrap it around ourselves, the meaning changes. Same is with information. As soon as we put information in, it changes. How do we control it? How can we work with it? How can we use it to help, right? So I think that that's really an important part of my work. And that's what you see here, going from the 2D to the 3D, seeing what happens. The body is the one who has all the information. It's all stored here. Our cultural, our social, our psychological, our mental, it's here. So it's an important part. Thank you for bringing that up.
Yeah, this relationship between algorithms and the body, I see it throughout the work. But I'm kind of curious to know, like, are there things in your practice or in your lives where you see this kind of interface of an algorithm and a body?
I know somebody. Where do you see that? That system of, was that this? No, it wasn't, it was this. You want to think about that?
Yeah, I can offer an example. So I can offer an example from actually just this morning on my way here. I was driving up and I'd sort of searched the directions on Google Maps, right? And I'm driving up and I'm like, almost at this building, and I see the driveway that I think I'm supposed to take into the parking lot that I remembered from the last time I was here, but the map said like, no, keep going straight and go around. I ended up like driving all the way around this campus, like in some parking garage. I have no idea where my truck is right now, to be totally honest. So I parked, and then I get out, and then I'm sort of like wandering around looking at my phone, like trying to find this little blue arrow. And like literally it's this algorithm from Google Maps that is like moving my body through space, right? And there's this moment where like I trusted the algorithm more than I trusted my own sort of physical memory of this space, right? How many folks have done that before? Yeah. Yeah. I mean, in this case, like it's pretty minor. Like it was, I felt really bad because I was like showing up late to this thing. Like, but like there are moments in this all the time that that have like bigger consequences. Sometimes it's a series of these sort of little things that subtly shift our relationship to how we sort of live in the world, how we relate to each other, you know. Or it can be like really significant things, like there is a moment where there is like a little blip on a radar, and the computer said like, oh, that's an incoming Iranian fighter jet. You need to take care of that. And this person operating the system said, I don't think it is, but the computer says it is, and I don't want to be the one who has to like answer for why I didn't follow what the computer said. And they sent launch, and it took out an aircraft, like a commercial aircraft plane. So like there's these moments of where algorithms and the body are really very, very intimately and powerfully connected, right? And I think that there's a lot that we talk about in relationship to the body and how we sort of move through the world. Michel Foucault is a really brilliant theorist on this topic. He talks about the kind of disciplinary society that sort of governs how bodies move through space, and how we sort of do that politically, and how power sort of flows through all of that. But then there's another great theorist, Deleuze, who really kind of picks that up and really sees how computational systems sort of interface with that as well. So there's this relationship between algorithms and the body. They're very pervasive through our society right now, and they're almost invisible to us in many, many ways. So it may not seem directly connected to all these works, but it's something that I really appreciate in this, and that the way your practice is oriented. You know, you are thinking about those things. You are writing little algorithms and Grasshopper, for example, to make these kind of patterns. But then like you've got this machine that you wrote an algorithm that made all these patterns, right? And then you laser cut that. But then how many hours are you standing here making tiny, tiny creases to do this? So there is this this real kind of intimate relationship between algorithm and body that I'd like to hear you to kind of talk about what you've learned from that, just in sort of performing that relationship in your practice.
Thank you. Great question. I just want to add another writer that we in our classes talk a lot about is Merleau-Ponty. We compare that with Foucault, or compare. We put him in the same kind of category, in the things of thinking about the body as the collector of all the information, and he talks about that embodiment. And then setting next to that Foucault in a sense of bringing in the political and the social. So I wanted to add that too, because Merleau-Ponty definitely has been an influence on my work, as has Deleuze with his the book The Fold. Anyway, we need to remember, and I want to start there because I think it's important. I started to realize that there is this vortex of information in front of us, surrounding us. It's all in here, right? As I see some people on their phones. It's here. It's giving us information, but we are broadcasting information too, right? It's not a relationship that is one way. So that two-way relationship, because they know what I buy in the store, right? They actually know that I like a particular white wine, right? So it is not just receiving, but you broadcast too. So what is that relationship that I then become, that in between, and how do I digest that? When I see a little baby going to a screen anywhere in public and doing this, I'm like, whoa, that's what we're doing, right? So being old, right, like me, I need to understand it to my way of thinking. I'm a textile artist. I accumulate. The dot next to the dot becomes the line on top of a line. That's how I work. I'm not the painter, and I want you to think about that when you start making choices. I'm not the painter who has the white canvas and put the red dot on the top. I need to work myself up to the red dot, because that's the way I think. Think in systems, I think in accumulation. That's how I understand the world. So when I sit there and fold that, I'm digesting all the research that I've done, all the talking that I've done with my amazing collaborators. If it was in Korea, if it was in Germany, these pieces are not here, or it was in my hometown with my friends, my Muslim friends in my neighborhood, my old neighborhood, I'm digesting that information. I need that. I need to do that. And you need to give yourself time if that's important to do that. If that's not your thing, if you don't, people say, do you have patience for that? Yes. I look at their work and I'm like, do you have patience for that? You're kidding? So what is it that you have the patience to digest the information? I have it, I work in my basement. These things, so when a student says, I only have a table, I'm like, I'm with you. That's what I have. These pieces I take apart and bring back. So I need to be practical too. This is great because I can fold this. I really am serious. Practical information of what your situation is and how do you translate that. But the moment I make these is the best, because that's when I take the information in and start thinking. That table is totally filled with quotes, because I listen to all kind of, not actually music, it's always podcasts, but notes, recipes, because I listen to cooking shows. That's my sketchbook. And then I sometimes take them out in the world, and here they are.
Yeah, I think I'm always fascinated by how much repetition you have in your work and how much sort of repeated handwork is. I think that comes from that kind of like fibers and textiles background. Yeah, I find it, I'm sort of in awe by that. Like, I would stab myself in the eyeballs if I had to do that. Like, I just can't. I can't. Like, or no, I would do it. Like, I'd get halfway through this and like, I'm making a robot. Like, like there's like, and then I will spend like 10 times longer making a robot to do this, or making an algorithm to do that than it would if I did it by hand. But there is, but that to me is like, I have a problem with kind of repetition in that regard. But there is, I totally agree with you that there's so much processing of things that happens within the body, right? And there's so much knowledge that exists within the body and that is embodied. And I think that's really, really important to think about, like in terms of your own practice and as you're developing this. It's you know, it's not just a spreadsheet of skills that you sort of accumulate, right? Those skills will live here in your hands, right? Like my hands know how to cut a mortise and tenon joint, right? There's so many things that like I do in a process that exists in the body, and it's really only through teaching that I've come to understand like how much just exists here, right? Because when I'm teaching somebody else, I have to like then verbalize all those things, which I never had to do because it was just here, it just kind of flows out. So I think that's something to really be attentive to, sort of in your own practices as well. What types of things sort of kind of, and there's certain practices that just really feel good to you as well, like, right? And I think you have to listen to that in a lot of ways, because if you're doing a practice that just makes you feel miserable, like you won't sustain that throughout your life. And there's nothing more important right now than to figure out like what practice like sustains you like as a living creature, because it's this is a long game as an artist, right? To be able to make something, to make an exhibition like this, like happens because you've been doing it for a very long time. And it's, yeah, it's a, yeah, it's a,
you have to do what sustains you, and at the same time, there's sometimes a pain involved in the process to get to the point where you can sustain that and understand the lesson and feel.
yes.
And so when you're learning a new skill, or and that's one reason why I never stayed with sewing, or a lot of the crafts that my mom and my brother too, because I wanted more instant results. And I didn't want to make the lousy dress, without the perfect seam.
Exactly.
And so had I done that, and I wish I had done that, I wish I stayed with it.
Yeah.
That's true. Thank you. It is never too late. Good point. Okay, so I'm definitely going to start drawing.
You have a new member of your sewing circle, I think.
Exactly. But I just wanted to acknowledge that's really important, because those skills, learning those skills, involves refocusing and reconnecting. And that's not easy anyway, and it's not easy in the 24/7 inundated world in which we live.
Yes.
I totally agree with you, but I always, and I want to keep that thought, although it's always painful. I always feel I'm an imposter. Do you know that feeling? I'm not good enough. I don't know my medium. I'm really not good in this. Still have it. Yeah. You know what? I'm going to keep it because it keeps me on my toes. Is it comfortable? No. I will add a little secret that this is real. This is not something I make up right now. The show was up for 2 weeks. I see an Instagram message from my husband. He's standing behind me, it's an old photo, and he's doing this to me. And his big blurb on the top said, and I'm going to say a word I'm not allowed to say in public, so don't tell the administration. He said to me, "Do you believe me now that it's a kick-ass show?" I needed it. And the reason I'm telling this is that you need to count on your loved ones. You need to count on your community. You need to count on each other and be tender to each other and tell them. Am I over my imposter syndrome? No. He needs to repeat it. But it's good because then you will go to that new technique. I am still an imposter in Grasshopper. You know. Yeah. Yeah. Oh, sorry. Yes.
And what they do is they follow you and also show part of your.
Thank you.
Also, like why you brought this for the students to see your process, just those kind of
Mhm.
stuff is really great.
Yeah.
Totally forgot. Everybody's sorry.
There's a whole group of other classes.
Great. Yeah. Can we move around a little? Can everybody kind of like at least shift their bottoms a little?
I always need help to get up.
I think it's good to get the blood flowing. Yeah.
The whole leg fell asleep.
Get some exercise.
Yeah. It was just...
All right.
So, yeah, if y'all want to just come on around here. Come on in. Yes, get close, get intimate. Slide underneath the piece. Go inside, yeah.
So cool. We from here on 70.
You're what?
We here.
Yes.
Oh, it's so sick.
I think it's beautiful.
I love how you can see the light coming through.
I think this is a really good example of another sewing circle. I always wanted this work starting to move. I actually, for this piece, and I'm in between, I wanted to make a digital puppet. I want to make the audience a digital puppeteer. You come in, you move your body, and this starts to move. So you are in charge of the Arduino, the microcontroller up there. This is an infrared sensor with a camera. And to be honest, we're still working on it. You remember when you come into Crit and you're like, not totally done. Here we are. But this, I worked with engineering students at UMBC, and it was really good for me to explain to them what I wanted. We all have different limits in our practice and limits in our discipline. So how do you talk to engineers about what you have in your head? We make drawings, we make sketches, and we talked a lot. I did that for a year, but it was during COVID, so it was quite problematic, of course. And then we had a concept. The piece was made. I had made the piece before, but I hadn't done this yet, and I hadn't done that yet. We worked on it for a year, so you can see the extent of the sewing session. Lots of talking, lots of trying out, lots of prototypes. What motor is right? What do we program? How do we program it? And what do I want to see? After that, we had, and I think they're coming soon, the head of engineering here at UMBC and our amazing engineer at MICA who volunteers in our class, Alan Grover, looked at me and he said, I want to make this dream reality for you. So we worked together, and we're still working. This afternoon, we're going to work more on this infrared thing. The show is almost over, so it's never over, right? But it was really important to have that conversation as a sewing circle and to have that conversation with people in other mediums. I encourage you to talk with people who are not in your medium. When I say to my sister who came over from Holland last week to see the work, I talk about embodied knowledge. And she's like, whoa, 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 what's that? So we sometimes go into terms that are not I had to explain it to her. And it's really important to do that. And that's what the sewing circles are about. What other pieces do you think we should look at?
What I appreciate about this piece is that, you know, you've got like each screw is like a node, like an individual point, and then they're connected by lines to each other, which then creates a surface, which is then folded around and created into this form. So, so we go from like 1D to 2D to 3D to now 4D with this sort of added element of motion to it. And I really appreciate that kind of like subtle sort of like breathing motion that we see here. And then I think is like just echoed in these videos nicely as well. Like that seems still, and then you see that little bit of movement of breath, right? Or just the blink of an eye. And I think it's a nice sort of echo to what we were talking about this morning. Because I was thinking about this piece and I was just like, I think maybe this is the first time Annette has used sort of motion in her work in this way. Yeah, but then you reminded me what?
And then he reminded me that I was a fashion designer in New York. And at the moment, it was kind of interesting because the fashion designer had seen my sculptures. And he said to me, they come from the body, they have to go back to the body. Somebody else who keeps trying to tell me something. And when I saw my pieces on the runway, it was the best thing that happened. Even my sculpture teacher said, you don't know anything about sculpture, but you know about the body. And that is sculpture. So go back to your own knowledge and add other knowledge, but think about that, right? So all these pieces are silent, although the motor I totally enjoy. But the four, maybe we can walk over there, if that's okay. So the 4 pieces over here. Come close. So we can all in. I think I already really talked about kind of internalizing our knowledge of our culture or who we are and how we can grow. How can we think about growing, right? So the internalization for me is really important. So what happened was, and I will tell you the honest story. I was, thanks to Mina, who made me aware of a residency in Korea. And I went there with no materials. I had a stack of doilies, paper doilies for Michael's. Not kidding. I needed Michael's close by with me. That's all I had. The first 4 days, I called my rock, my husband, and I said, I need to come home. I can't do this. There's no sewing machine. There's no thread. There are no equipments that I'm used to. After 4 days, this is what he told me. They gave you an apartment. You have an amazing studio. They flew you out. Get to work. He really did. And he was so right. So what happened, there was a video camera. Somebody was making my website and they said, do you want video in there, your website? I'm like, no. And that is never going to do video. Wow, was I wrong there? How do we learn? So what I was doing research on the hanbok. The hanbok is this beautiful, incredible traditional clothing in Korea. Because clothing is the metaphor for me for understanding self. So I was doing research. I look out of my apartment. I see a group running around in these amazing hanboks. I was on the third floor, running downstairs without falling. I followed them. And they went into a building. I followed them. They went into a room. I followed them. I didn't speak a word of Korea besides saying hi and thank you and goodbye. They started singing and playing music. And it's called pansori. I didn't understand the word. It was the most beautiful, emotional. I got tears in my eyes. At that moment, I knew these people weren't only wearing what I was doing the research on, they were internalizing emotions. So I worked with them for 3 weeks. I told them that I wanted to live in these as much as I wanted to live in Franz Hals in the clothing. And I worked with them for 3 weeks. We had dinners, we had parties, we had fun. He's a good partier. I'm still in touch with him. But the thing is, when Couwenberg put on this costume, he became regal. I'm not kidding, regal. Not only that he became regal, but his voice, he starts singing. Because it really, that costume gives him the power to do that. And I will be honest, and I told him too, he's a punky kid. Not anymore. He just sent me an image of getting married in a suit. But what is really important to think about that I told them what was actually a little mean, but I told them why. They were not allowed to sing. They had to internalize one song that was the most important. So what they did, they internalized it. She starts crying. He's totally in control. He's not moving. I told them to sit still. They were not allowed to move either because I wanted them, the body, to take it in and see how much we can handle. I told them, I talked about that, how we would do that. And Micah student who was in Seoul came down to translate. So she became my buddy, the intermediary. What was really interesting for me to be in a country where I didn't know the language. And myself, when I came to this country, when I moved to Ithaca, New York, knowing this much in the language. So for me, it was really important to communicate with them through this and be translated. And I told them I was going to hybridize the information. The doilies are here. Michael's is present, right? What really for me is an idea of commodity. We can all go to Michael's, we can all buy, we can all, as my grandmother did, have lace. I came from quite a working class environment, putting lace all over the wall, very inappropriate parts in the house. But for her, there was status. This commodification of the lace, for me, becomes important. It's accessible, and we can all have a beautiful color. So anyway, long process. Any questions about this? Or listen to some pansori, and Mina can tell you all about it. Really amazing, emotional.
Just to give you some cultural context, pansori is actually channeling nature. So it's not just singing. It's the closest thing is thinking about opera, but it's not something within just the body, but really the body's relationship with nature and the universe that is being channeled. And for them to be internalizing that, like singing within, is quite powerful. And I think the fact that they do have, what is this called again? The ruffles, the collar, but there's a term that's written. Clef? There's a term for the, it's a very kind of intercultural merging.
It is. Yeah. 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 Yes.
So it's a really wonderful merger. Anyway, no, go
Okay.
ahead.
No, it totally. I mean, there's a lot of a story here because the other thing is, again, this is not only the sewing circle with these incredible people. It was a sewing circle with a photographer who was overseas. I had no idea how to light this. So how do you do that? Then you go to a friend or somebody you know, and you say, I would do snapshots, send it overseas, get it back. Because I wanted Rembrandt lighting. I wanted the classical Rembrandt lighting, the paintings of Frans Hals that I always wanted to live in myself as a kid. So how do you get exactly that light, right? So anyway, questions?
I really like what you're, I think we've talked a number of points today about the ways in which sort of making an object, then we can sort of stand around and we can talk about this object. So it sort of externalizes a lot of the thoughts and ideas into a thing that we can then consider it. And it also, in some ways, I think is very disarming in a way that allows us to like, we can talk to each other by both kind of talking to this node together. I feel like what this piece is doing is very different. It's kind of the same, but kind of the inverse at the same time, because you've made this object, but then you completely envelop the person in it. I think in the same way as happens in this process, as Mina was describing, like where you've got nature around you, but you're channeling it internally, so that there's typically so often as sculptors and makers, we're sort of like externalizing this thing, but in this process you've really sorry, gesturing but in this process you've really internalized all of that, and it's so powerful to see in these pieces.
Thank you. And I think, I don't know how much more time we have, but I look at, yes. Yes.
Well, just thank you, Mina. Yeah. Well, just listening to your anecdote about discovering these people, it seems to me that that's all about serendipity, right? That you sort of encountered something and you followed it to completion in a way. And when I think about that sort of way of working and thinking in relation to sort of a lot of digital fabrication is, to me, I intuit it as very sort of like you're willing yourself. There's a very sort of like not a lot of room for obviously room for exploration and innovation, but you have to, precisely code your intention, right? And so what I'm wondering is, as you got involved in the fabrication work, how did that impulse for surprise, how did that like engage with the very sort of intentional aspect of doing that kind of fabrication work? And then as you're sort of reflecting on it, this is another kind of question that's maybe more instructive to the students. As you reflect on the work, are there things that, as we know, students will be entering a new paradigm of engaging in work and, artificial intelligence, right? That it's sort of like, this is just gonna, what you're doing is going to be where they will end up eventually, right? And so are there things that you instructively want them to embrace, but also be resistant of? So I think those two questions are kind of connected, but I'll give you the floor.
you.
Sure.
Thank you so much. Can I start with the artificial intelligence? I'm doing a lot of research on that right now. I'm looking at a lot of people who think about that because it's the next step. It's the next step for me too. If I start understanding, and I still think that I'm disagreeing a little bit, algorithms are manipulated. You can manipulate them. You can manipulate the digital. The machine can become part of who I am, and intuition can still work. But you have to work for it. You have to fight for it. And I can give examples, but maybe later. Artificial intelligence is really interesting, right? But very scary. I was even told by one of my colleagues that anything with electronics was creepy, right? I think we need to approach all that as a threat, but it can give us a power too. So let's think about the power of AI. Artificial intelligence in Switzerland and at Stanford, they're doing research right now of how we can put in data. I teach a class called data wear, like wearing it, where the data is collected, what is happening right now, right? Instagram, Facebook, Google, Amazon is data is money. It's economy. So how can we use data through artificial intelligence to create a better world? So I'll give you one example and we can talk more. I can talk a whole day about artificial intelligence. One example, Stanford and in Switzerland, they're actually bringing all the data in that they have, that people who immigrate to Europe, where they should be placed. It's not that one person who sit behind, totally based on artificial intelligence, based on our social norms, our values, our ethics, our politics, of course. But here's where they use it. They say, if we put data in from 10,000 sources into the computer, we can find the perfect match where this person who just immigrated needs to be. There's a job there. There's a community there. Just to give you an example. So what they do is they put all the information in on the places that the immigrant would go to, all the information of what the immigrant said they need. They have a family of 6. They want community. They want theater. You name it. They put it in. And actually they have found out that 60% of the people who are placed compared to how somebody behind the desk who has that power decided about them. That's an example of a positive way that we can use this. You and I need to be part of this. That's the reason why I teach this. Not because to keep myself busy. I have a lot of things that I can think of. You need to be digital literate. And you already are, but you need to know what it is. You need to question it. And I always keep saying, I'm going to, and you are going to build that table to sit around to talk about this. And that is really necessary. That answered your question. So I look at nature for clues. I look at nature for systems that I can understand, because nature, as we all know, is amazing. Nature turns things upside down for me. So to give you one example about the digital, renourish those circular pieces. I did research on palm trees. Palm trees are interesting, right? Because they are wide on the top, narrow on the bottom. A sculptor always thinks the other way around, right? We always think about that something has to be wide on the bottom. And I'm like, no. They're in nature, they got it already. So let's see. So I did a lot of research on the palm tree. I made a drawing of the basics, their roots, how they come out, just sketch. Imported that into Rhino, see how the system of Rhino with its systems will translate that. And then Jose, it was a great question. How much can I influence? What can I do? Then I print these black notes. I cut these, then I put it together. You know what I learned? That nature is a lot smarter than I am. And I'm not kidding. But that's really important for me to understand how things grow. When we put a seed in the ground, it grows a certain way, but the system can tell me of how it is natural growing and how I need to approach it. I'm not allowed to say the swear words here, but they came from the basement up into the house. It was so tough to put them together. There's no glue in here, no screw. I can take them apart. And for me, that was important because I can now change them as an artist. The algorithm gave me certain things, and now I can start changing them. I need to go through that to understand the digital part. And nature can give you a way of doing that. All right.
Yeah, that's really, really lovely to hear you talk about all the different kind of sources of knowledge that you sort of gather for the making of these works. And I think it's also really, really important, like as you all are here in this kind of period of education, right? And it's so much of it is about sort of gathering knowledge, right? And building up your practice. But I think what's also very critical to understand is the ways in which your practice generates knowledge as well, and generates an understanding of the world. And through this experience, as you were sort of opened with talking about, like this kind of difference between just kind of a collection of knowledge and this kind of experience. And I think that's what's so valuable about an artistic practice, is that you generate this kind of knowledge through experience, through practice. It's applied, it's bodily, you know it in you, you know it like computationally, you know it sort of technically, but also bodily, and it's in you as a person, and it's in you also like socially as well. So it's this kind of shared exchange of knowledge, but this collective development of knowledge and development of understanding the world and how we want to live in this world together. It's going to be really, really hard from here on out. And and that's just so vital that you sort of like incorporate that challenge and kind of tackle that challenge through your practice as an artist. And you do that collectively together. And you sort of form your own circles now, because that's going to be the basis for sort of how we get through all together in this life. And it's been like a real honor to be part of your circle, and you've helped me understand how we get through here together so much. And it's been really wonderful to kind of share this with everybody here today.
Thank you so much for today. This is just such an honor and pleasure. Thank you everyone for being here. So the Zoom, live Zoom is going to do like a fly through and continuously like share this experience with those viewing online. And for those of you who've come later, please spend some time here. The artists and Ryan, they're here to field any questions. And I believe that for the early bus people, we do have to go back. So please just work with your instructors knowing when to return back to campus. But thank you so much for being here. Thank you for your time. Thank you, Ryan. Thank you, Annette. Thank you, UMBC and the professors and everyone. Have a great day.